Hi, Kathleen Guire here. Welcome to this trauma-informed parenting workshop, How to Have Peace When Your Kids Are in Chaos. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you a few things. Number one, if you haven't downloaded your workbook, go ahead and get that. And if you can, print that out because you're going to need it. And I put the link in the chat so you can do that if you haven't already. Okay, and the second thing that I want to tell you is that while we're going through the material, I want you to keep two people in mind, at least two people in mind, yourself and one of your kiddos or one of the kiddos you work with or somebody who is in your family, and that's why you're attending this. Now, why yourself? Because when we absorb the material and we can apply it to ourselves first, then it helps us better understand what these kiddos are going through. And of course, we want to keep a child in mind as well, so that we can apply it to them as well. Now, I also have to say before we start is trigger warning. You're probably here because you have a child with a capital letter syndrome, FASD, ADD, ADHD, GAD, SPD, all the letters, or you brought a child home through foster care or adoption, and they've experienced a lot of trauma. So you may be triggered, but I will just say it's okay. And I hate to say that, but it's important to say that because it's all right to feel the emotions and get through to the other side, okay? So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to stop my video and I'm going to share my PowerPoint and we will get started. All right, here we go. How to have peace when your kids are in chaos. I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I think it's super important and it will be super helpful to you. But you may wonder, if you're new to my email list or you just found this workshop through social media or through friends of mine, like, who are you? So I'm Kathleen, and it's my honor to help you find more peace in your home. I'm the mother of 7, 4 through adoption, former National Parent of the Year, author, teacher, and speaker. But more important than any of those things, I'm a parent just like you. I know what it's like to raise kiddos with trauma histories and capital letter syndromes. I used to feel as if I were the only one struggling, and because I felt that way, I isolated myself. And I don't want you to feel alone in your parenting journey. So, spoiler alert, traditional parenting didn't work. When we adopted a sibling group of 4, I suddenly lost my parenting mojo. Like, I didn't know how to parent my newbies. And plus, some of my other bio kiddos had capital letter syndrome. So everything was backfiring and I needed answers fast. But here's the thing, I naively thought because I had experienced early childhood trauma that I was equipped to handle kiddos who had experienced the same. I thought it was all about the behavior. Maybe you think that too. I thought I could fix the behaviors and the chaos would be gone. And that's exactly what How to Have Peace When Your Kids Are in Chaos is about. I'd love to help you learn what works and get some new tools in your parenting tool belt. Once you start using these new tools, you can find some peace in your homes. That doesn't mean the chaos will totally disappear. I wish that were true, but it won't. It means that you will have more peace in the midst of it. You will understand the why behind the behavior. You will be able to meet your kiddos where they are and connect with them more. You'll enjoy your child more or your children more and have more peace in your home. Isn't that what we want? Okay, let's move on. This is what I used to think worked. Learn the science, starting from the bottom here. Learn the science, apply the science, and then have peace and change the behavior. I used to think that if I just learned the science, then the behaviors would change. So I did the logical thing. I'm a researcher. I love reading. I love watching educational videos and going through trainings. So I bought all the books and I researched, and I read books to my husband at night when he was trying to fall asleep. And I would just say, listen to this. This is why he's doing this. I thought it was all about the behavior. Maybe you think that too. Maybe you think that if you learn the science, you can figure out the why behind the behavior, and then the behaviors will be fixed. Maybe that's why you signed up for this. But don't click out. Hang on. It didn't work. Here's what I realized. I was so busy trying to fix my kids that I didn't realize the biggest part of the chaos was me. It's not that my kids were acting or reacting properly. They struggled with regulation, and because of their past experience. And it still hurts to say this, like the true common denominator was me. It was me and my reactions. My triggers and their triggers were having a trigger war. Now, maybe you didn't experience childhood trauma, and maybe that's not you. But hang on and listen, because the next part, I think, still applies to all parents. So this is what actually works. We need to reframe our beliefs. Then we need to make sense of and peace with our past. Then we learn the science, apply the science, and have peace and change the behaviors. Now, I will point out that you can do the learning and reframing and making sense of your past all at the same time. But if you just start from learn the science and you skip the bottom two, then it's not going to be as effective. So by beliefs, what do I mean? Sometimes it's our beliefs about parenting. Because I was talking about the chaos that I was causing because of my past, and I needed to reframe some beliefs about my value and who I was. But often it's reframing our beliefs about what parenting looks like. So parenting kiddos with trauma histories and capital letter syndromes is going to look different than parenting neurotypical kids. So we may need to reframe our beliefs and leave behind that, well, this is the way it is, and this is the way I was parented, and learn some new parenting techniques and tools. So we're going to just work through this graphic from the bottom up. And let me just say that this is a very skeletal list. This is just to get you started. And this whole skeletal list is from my book, How to Have Peace When Your Kids Are in Chaos. It's kind of the premise of the whole book. There's a lot more meat in the book, but this is a great way just to get started. And it is valuable enough to stick to the end. All right, let's start with reframing our beliefs. Like I said, sometimes it's about our parenting, sometimes it's about our past, sometimes it's both. I am an adult with a childhood trauma history. Like I said earlier, my home was ruled by chaos. It was disorganized attachment at best. I had a sense of evil foreboding at the time, like all the time. I lived with an all-consuming sense of fear. I had no felt safety or real safety in my early years. I felt as if I had no value. And just to understand this, like I said, apply this to yourself and apply this to your kiddos. Abuse says you don't matter. That's the belief system I held about myself. And maybe that's the belief system some of your kiddos have about themselves. And if they feel they don't matter, they're going to make sure that they matter, and it may come out in behaviors. Now, trauma can make us feel ashamed even when the trauma was something that was done to us instead of something we chose. Now, what do I mean by that? It's amazing the level of shame that we can feel when something is said to us or done to us that we didn't choose to be part of. And that's often where our kiddos are coming from. Like they have had trauma in their early childhood and they feel such a sense of shame, but they didn't do anything wrong. So we have to remember that. And shame separates us from others, and it can cause us to have a faulty view of ourselves and of God. Now, because I'm a Christian, I had to reframe my beliefs about how God saw me. And if we have that revelation that we have value, and we reframe the belief from we do matter, from we don't matter to we do matter, then it's going to make a difference in our parenting. And that's why it's so important to apply this material to ourselves first. Now, the scripture that helped me get started on this healing was long before he laid down earth's foundations, he had us in mind, had settled on us as the focus of his love to be made whole and holy by his love. Long, long ago, he decided to adopt us into his family through Jesus Christ. What pleasure he took in planning this. Now, I prayed this over myself and over my children over and over because they needed their beliefs reframed. And can you make a child reframe their beliefs? No, you can't sit down and have a lecture and say, okay, it's time for you to reframe your beliefs. But it's very important that we help them by showing them, because they mirror us. So if we believe that we have value and that we are loved and that we are made whole, then they will begin to mirror that in themselves, not immediately, but eventually. Okay, let's move on to make sense of our past. Now, I am moving very quickly because, like I said, this is just like a skeletal little workshop that gets you started on these things. Now, we need to make sense of and peace with our past. And this is why. We must make sense of our past to be fully present for our kids. So important. If we are parenting from our past, what I mean by that is if we have a lot of shame and guilt by things that were done to us, and we are parenting from that place of shame and guilt, we may be doing the same things, not intentionally. I'm not saying we're doing this intentionally, but we may be parenting from a shame-based nature. And because of these kiddos who have experienced trauma and have a capital letter syndrome, and they feel different, they feel odd, they like, I don't fit in, they already have that shame. So that's why it's so important for us to make sense of and peace with our past. Now, you might be rolling your eyes right now and be like, I'm ready to close this button. I don't want to watch the rest of this workshop. I signed up just because I wanted my home to feel less chaotic or more peaceful. Maybe your home feels like a war zone right now. And now I'm asking you to do all this examining of your past and reframing your beliefs. I'm getting super personal. Even though I shared a little bit about mine, you may not want to share about yours. And I understand that. This is what sometimes we parents believe, is that our past, that is the way that we were raised, or the things that have happened to us in the past, is just like this book on the shelf. Like you can just slide it on the shelf, done. That book's over, starting a new book. But the problem with that is triggers are where the past and present intersect. What does that mean? It's kind of what I was saying earlier. When your past is parenting, because you're constantly being triggered, then that's where the past and the present intersect. For example, let's say that your parents were super strict about at the family meals, everybody was quiet. And if somebody spilled a drink or didn't eat all of their food, then parents got angry, and it was very legalistic, for lack of a better word. And then when you get stressed, you feel yourself going into your past, and you're sitting at the dinner table and a kiddo spills a drink and not on purpose. And then suddenly you're back in the past. You're like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? We don't spill our drinks, or more words than I'm going to share on here. So you see what I'm saying? This is where triggers are where the past and the present intersect. Now, remember, I said that you were going to do a little bit of work during this workshop. So hopefully you printed your workbook. What we're going to do right now is we are going to work on these journaling prompts, and I will read the top of the page to you before you get started. My kids' behaviors were triggering things that happened in my past, and I was feeling it all over again. I was taking their behaviors personally because I was personally affected by them. Just as a warning, we can't make sense of and peace with our past in one journaling session. This is just to get you started. Find a support group, a therapist, or a coach to help you continue your journey. Now, what I would like you to do at this point is go ahead and stop the video and set at least a 10-minute timer and answer these questions. Or just follow these journaling prompts. Write down one thing that your kids do that triggers you. And one of them that I'll just share mine before you get started so you know which direction to head with this. One that really triggers me is yelling and screaming. And why? Think about why that behavior triggers you. Is it linked to an event in your past? For me, yes. It was because I was raised in an alcoholic environment for a period of my childhood. So that really triggered me. I did not like yelling. I did not like screaming. So, and the last question is, how can you address these behaviors moving forward? And then one of the things that I had to do was separate those memories, make sense of and peace with my past. I'm still working on that. I will be working on it for the rest of my life, but to just separate those memories from right now. And often what I would do with my kiddos, and I still do with my grandkiddos, is just offer a redo. Can you try that again? Can you try that with a better attitude? And so that's the way you can work through this worksheet. There's no wrong way to journal it. There's no right way to journal it. It's all about what's going to help you. So you can do this. So stop the video now, and I will meet you in 10 minutes. Welcome back. I hope that helped. I know that it helps me to journal those things out and to figure out how to move forward. So we are finally to learn the science. And I'm sure that you wish that we started with learn the science, but believe me, even as painful as these journaling exercises are in thinking about your past and your triggers, it's important. It will help. Because once we begin to make sense of and peace with our past, we can learn the science of how trauma affects our kiddos. Once we learn the science, we can understand the why behind our kiddos' behavior. Why is he doing this? What is going on? And the science helps us to understand that. When a child is behaving poorly, we often try to treat the symptom rather than getting to the root of the issue. And what I mean by that is okay, you're having a fit, you need to calm down, you need to stop yelling, you need to be quiet. But what is the root of the issue? There's always a root. And when it comes to trauma and having a capital letter syndrome, we have to remember that science says there are 5 B's affected by trauma. Now, I say we have to remember, maybe you've never heard that before, but it's important to know, because in kids with trauma histories and capital letter syndromes, what we call behavioral disorders are a symptom of the effect that trauma has had on their development. Now, what are the 5 B's? Here they are right here. These are all of the B's affected by trauma: the brain, the biology, the body, the beliefs, the behavior. Now, I remember going through my training, and the first thing that when it was when we were learning about the 5 B's, like, there are only 5 B's. Like, no, this is pretty much everything. This is pretty much everything. So the brain, you have altered brain development and an overactive amygdala. So what is an overactive amygdala? Think of the scariest moment you've ever had in your life and feeling that way all the time. So an overactive amygdala, I can talk, is being in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, or just constantly having those high levels of cortisol coursing through your system. So biology, we have an altered neurochemistry. The body, you have altered physical development and impacted ability to process sensory inputs. You know, a lot of these kiddos have sensory processing disorder, or some sensory processing that's overwhelming for them. Sight, sound, loud noises, taste, like they can't eat in certain foods, just all of the senses are impacted. And then one that a lot of people don't talk about are beliefs, which we talked about at the beginning with ourselves. We have to reframe our beliefs. But our kiddos who have experienced trauma have an altered belief system, or the lens through which they see the world. And that's really important, because you cannot discount the belief that a child has. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then behavior, that's the one that we hear about most often. It's like, you know, why can't this kid behave? And this is why. It's because one of the B's affected by trauma is an altered ability to self-regulate in response to stressors. Now, when I talk about co-regulation, I had someone at a workshop the other night just ask me, well, what does co-regulation mean? Like, well, it means basically you have to be the brain for the child because they can't regulate. What does it mean that they can't regulate? They cannot control their reactions to stressors, whether it's a loud birthday party, whether it's in a classroom setting or at church. And suddenly you wonder, why is this kid melting down? Or why are they screaming? Or why are they running around and jumping on furniture? That's why, because the behavior is one of the things that is affected by trauma. Okay, time for journaling prompts again. And this is why this one is really important. I know I just threw a whole bunch of information at you, and I wish I could spend a whole hour on the 5 B's. I actually have a whole workbook on the 5 B's, which I can send to you in an email if you'd like that. But now we need to take that information, we need to let it soak in, and we need to start thinking about identifying our kiddos' triggers. Like, if all of those 5 B's are affected and our kiddos are being triggered all the time, we need to start identifying the triggers so that we, as the parents, can be the brain. We know when to co-regulate to help them by keeping track of them. So what preceded the meltdown? Note when there's sensory overload: lights, noise, taste, touch, jostled in a crowd, etc. And is it something that triggered a deeper memory that leaves you scratching your head going, what in the world is happening? Now, one of my kiddos, now I'll just share mine. Maybe this will help you get started thinking about it. So what preceded the meltdown? I remember a specific time where we were on a field trip. We were going to a museum in a large city, and my son, who was a teen at the time, it was just so overwhelming for him because the museum was really super crowded. There was so much noise and it was reverberating off of the walls. And although we had an amazing docent who was talking about a unit we had just covered, Roman and Greco architecture. My son did not absorb any of the information. He couldn't answer any of the questions. So what preceded the meltdown? Just traveling to a large city, going into a crowded museum, not being able to, his senses were shutting down. He couldn't process the information. So there was sensory overload. Lights, noises, tastes, touch. He was jostled in the crowd. And not to mention, they took our lunches and they put them on a cart and wheeled them away. So taking away the food source. And then to top it off, when it was time for us to eat lunch, they took us in an underground tunnel. Oh my goodness, add that to sensory overload. So that's just one example. And then another one for the bottom is the bottom question. Is it something that triggered a deeper memory that leaves you scratching your head? Now this one, I did figure it out. I figured it out right away. And it has to do with hand sanitizer. My son was born prematurely and he was in the hospital for like 4 or 5 months before he was moved to an orphanage. And one of the things he could not stand was the smell of an antiseptic or a hand sanitizer. So we were out eating lunch with some friends and we had all these tables put together with all of our kids sitting next to each other. And this mom who was on the other side of the table from me was dropping a drop of hand sanitizer on each kiddo's hand. And I saw that drop of hand sanitizer fall towards his hand in slow motion while I was screaming no. And there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. And it hit his hand and he screamed until his lips turned blue and he passed out. So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So right now, pause the video and then take 10 minutes, set a timer for 10 minutes, and then meet me back here and we will keep going. Oh, and I forgot to do the trigger scale. So if you've already stopped the video and you've started it again, you don't have to stop and do this, but you can use this when you are tracking these meltdowns. Use this trigger scale. Now, I have number 1 being the worst, but what I really mean by that is like the meltdown is just over the top. And why I put 1 is the worst is 10 is the best, meaning you are able to co-regulate with your child. You are, give yourself a 10. I can do this. They're responding to me. They're connecting with me. And although they're beginning to melt down, I was able to minimize that meltdown because I'm co-regulating with them. So go ahead and keep using this trigger scale. I would print more than 1. I would print 1 per child. All right, we're finally to apply the science. Yay. I'm sure you've been waiting for this. Like finally get to those tips and all of those things that you promised. Here we are. Let me talk a little bit about traditional parenting first. Traditional parenting relies on pointing out offenses, which can lead to an us against them mentality. And we don't want that. We do not want to parent with an us against them mentality. We want to parent with a mentality that we are on their side, right? If you've ever overheard your parents talking about you as if you were a problem, then you know what I mean. Thinking you are a problem causes separation between your parents and you. And the same thing with our kiddos. Harping on an issue has the same result, separation. You never do that right. I always have to remind you, you messed up again. Constant reminders of our past offenses don't leave any room for connection. So in case you haven't figured it out by now, I'm going to say it again. Traditional parenting isn't effective with kiddos with trauma histories and or capital letter syndromes because of the way that trauma shapes the 5 Bs that we discussed. And this is why. Traditional parenting tends to swoop in and fix the immediate problematic behavior. It is a short-term approach that doesn't work. Instead, you need to take the time to consider the need behind the child's behavior and focus on the ultimate goal of connection. Do we have to correct? Absolutely. But we want connection and correction. And when I say traditional parenting tends to swoop in and fix the immediate problematic behavior, it's that be quiet. If you don't behave, or if you don't be quiet in the store, then you're not going to get a treat, or, whatever. Sometimes it's being, and I understand, been there, done that. It's sometimes being more concerned about how we're perceived around our peers and in public. And those short-term fixes, those looks, the mom look and all of those things, it's not going to work long-term. Traditional parenting relies on pointing out offenses. Like I said, I wanted to say that again, which can lead to an us versus them mentality. Okay, now I'm going to get to the instead of tips. These are tips that you can use instead of traditional parenting. And since this is just a short workshop, I cannot go into them in detail, but it's very important that you learn these if you want to use them. I do have a whole workbook on them, and I will email the link to that to you. Instead of a lecture, use simple language, about 8 to 12 words total. Lecturing just doesn't work, especially when a child has a processing disorder and they can't process information quickly. Then you could stand there and talk for 3 paragraphs and they didn't get 1 word. So you use simple language. Things like walk, don't run. Use your words. Try that again. And instead of waiting for behavior to intensify, respond quickly. What that means is we cannot be couch potato parents with these kiddos. It just doesn't work. Yelling across the room, hey, I said to stop that, stop that, stop that. I'm going to count to 3. No, get up. Because, and I've been there. Believe me, I'm not judging anybody. I've been there. Because what you don't want on the other end of that is waiting for the behavior to intensify until it turns into a 45 or 2-hour meltdown. Been there, done that. So respond quickly, get down on the kid's level, address the behavior, and move on. Instead of giving orders, offer simple choices. Now, I'm not telling you to have your child make life-altering decisions. When I say offer simple choices, it can be as simple as, do you want Cheerios or Chex for breakfast? Do you want French toast or pancakes? Do you want to wear these shoes or those shoes? Do you want to do it yourself or do you need help? And the last one, do you want to do it yourself or do you need help, is one I've used more than any other simple choice. And I've seen my daughters use that. In fact, one of my daughters was here for 2 weeks with my grandkiddos, 6 of them, and we had a blast, but I saw her use that. Do you need help or do you want to do it yourself? Probably 200 times. And the reason why is kids like to feel a sense of control, like they do have choices. So we give them choices. Plus, it's training for later in life when they have to make the big choices, Instead of just correcting, give an immediate retraining and a redo. What's a redo? A redo is simply, let's try that again. Like if they say something really smart or they steal the Play-Doh from their sibling or something, let's try that again and walk them through. And you may even need to tell them what to say. Like, I'm sorry, I stole your Play-Doh. And they might say it like they're Darth Vader, but it's okay. Keep going, then move on. Instead of expecting a child to know, clarify expectations. This is a biggie. You hear parents, including myself, I've said it before, you should have known better. Well, how? Did you clarify the expectations? Did you explain to them what was going to happen? Especially with kiddos with capital letter syndromes who do not read social cues. They don't know what they're supposed to do. So it's okay to walk them through and to actually do like a training outside of the moment, which means practice it. Instead of isolating when a child is dysregulated, keep the child near you. Now, I know timeout is super big in the parenting world. Now, this is a timeout where you keep the child near you. So it's the same principle, but they need to actually be near you because you are co-regulating for them. Instead of only noticing the bad behaviors, offer praise for success. Now that's a biggie because kiddos who have trauma histories, they get into this cycle of what we call bad behaviors over and over and over again. So they're constantly being corrected and then they constantly feel ashamed. So if you find some things to praise, and it may be things like, that's a great job building Legos, or I love what you did with that Play-Doh, or thank you for bringing your plate from the table and putting it in the dishwasher. Just find so many things that you can praise. You need to get that balance of 7 praises for every correction. I know that's a lot, but you can just figure out things to praise for. One of the things that I do is if I notice that kids are being quiet and they're playing together, not that they have to be quiet, that's not what I'm implying, but they're getting along for like 60 seconds. Like I have to notice it. Hey, you guys are getting along so well. It may only last for 60 seconds, but they get that praise. Instead of taking it personally, remember there is a need behind the behavior. And that's pretty much what we've been talking about. Just kind of separate yourself from the behavior and say, what's going on here? What is the need? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they afraid? Do they not understand what the expectation is? Are they feeling like you're not valuing them or loving them? There's always a need behind the behavior. When I say need, I'm not talking about a want. I'm not saying you need to go buy your child a new toy or anything like that. I'm saying that there's usually a need behind the behavior. So like I said, I have a whole workbook on those and I will share them in the email. Finally, peace. Change the behaviors. Here we go. We're to the end. As we reframe our beliefs, go you, make sense of and peace with our past, go you. Learn the science, apply the science, we will begin to have more peace in our homes. Now remember, this is just like a skeletal, or I even say in the workbook, it's a roadmap you need to get you from chaos to peace. But there will be lots of pit stops and turns along the way. It's not a linear path. In fact, you will be making progress. Like I suggest you pick one of those parenting tools and you start using it for a month or even longer. And then you might see some progress in that area. But if there's a change or a stress, we're going to see regression. So it is not a linear path. And if you start addressing your triggers, go you. You may feel worse than you feel better. Like if you're trying to make sense of and peace with your past and you're journaling, and then you're realizing, oh my goodness, the reason my child is doing this is because their trigger triggered my trigger. You might feel worse, but it's okay. Don't carry shame and guilt. Move on. After all the years of helping foster adoptive capital letter syndrome parents and being one myself, I found that we feel ashamed if we need help. Ask for help. Find a support group, a therapist or counselor, or a trauma-informed parenting coach like me. Keep learning. Like I said, this PDF is just a skeletal overview. Check out my podcast, Trauma Informed Parenting. Read the articles, grab all the free resources. Yeah, resources I have. And I'm so proud of you for working through this PDF. This is a final reminder before we finish. We must let go of the myth that perfect parents exist. They don't. And raising kiddos who have trauma histories means a huge learning curve for us parents. So if you see other parents who have neurotypical kids and they just seem to be sailing along without any issues, then just remember what you're doing is more difficult, but that doesn't make them perfect parents. And we're not striving to be perfect parents. We're striving to connect, or I shouldn't even say the word striving. Our goal is to help our kiddos, meet them where they are, lower our expectations when they're too high, and connect with them. So like I said, check out the Trauma Informed Parenting podcast and read the articles on the website. And I am so proud of you for going through this whole workshop. And I'm proud of you for stopping and doing the work that you needed to do. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great, an amazing, amazing time. And one more thing, and I will send you the link for this in an email. There is a free video training. It's just a really short video. It's less than 20 minutes. So it's a good one to do like, hey, I need some encouragement. I need a boost. I need some reminders. It's 3 simple ways to connect with your child. So just remember, you're on the way to more peace in your home and less chaos. And this free bonus training will encourage you and offer you simple ways to connect with your child. Alrighty, so that is it for the workshop. And I'm so glad that you joined me today. And I will make sure that if you are on the Zoom email list for this workshop, I will send you all of those links that I talked about. And one final thing, it depends on when you are watching this, but I do have trauma-informed parent coaching, and I can send you a link to that as well. Thanks for joining me.